Welcome to the Institute for Advanced Astonishment. Today we have a very special guest. We're flipping the tables on him. Usually he's doing the interview, and now he could relax and just give us answers to the mysteries of creation. How are you, Rick Archer? Rick Archer.
Pretty good. Good. For some reason, I'm reminded of a Kurt Vonnegut quote. He said something like, "I belong to the Church of Universal Astonishment," or something
Oh,
like that. Perpetual
that's
astonishment,
that's
something like
beautiful.
that. Yeah.
I got to meet him. Did I? I probably never mentioned that.
No, I didn't know that.
I got to meet him, and he was signing books on Long Island in New York, and he wasn't looking up. He was head down, and you know
Right.
that face and that hair, head
Yeah.
down. And he was just signing and pushing, signing, pushing the book, going, going. And
Yeah.
I said, "No way! He's a hero of mine." So my girlfriend had no book to get signed. So I had two books with me. I had Cat's Cradle, brand new, beautiful copy, and I had this Darwin biography, this beautiful Darwin biography called "The Tormented Evolutionist," with this big picture of Darwin with the beard. And because I knew Vonnegut liked Darwin, so I had those two books. So I gave my girlfriend Cat's Cradle, and he signed, and I took the Darwin book and I held it up high and dropped it from about 4 feet onto the table. He didn't budge. He didn't look. Nothing. No flint. And then I slid it
Interesting.
to him and
Hmm.
he caught it. So he was paying attention. He caught it. And then he held it and he looked at it and he held it in his hands like this and he said, "Darwin, I love him." And I said, "Me too." Because he wrote that Galapagos book. And he said, "You
Hmm.
want me to sign this?" And I said, "Sure." And he signed it and do you know what he does when he signs?
No.
He made this little, I don't have a pen, but it looked like
Little
an
squiggle.
asterisk, like an
Hmm.
asterisk. And then he signed, and I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Oh, you want to know what that is?" And he said, "Come here, son." And I went up to his ear and he said, and I have to say it, he said, "That's an asshole." And that's what I think of. That's what I think of the whole earth, everyone here. He goes, "Present company excluded." As a,
That's funny. That's pretty
yeah,
good.
that was Kurt. He was
Hmm.
amazing.
Yeah.
So Rick, uh, can you just show us where you are? I had a glimpse of it. I don't know if you could pan on.
Yeah. Let me just turn the
So beautiful.
camera around here. There. No, that's not working. Sorry.
It's
I'll
okay.
just turn the phone around. I was trying to
Oh,
reverse the camera.
very beautiful.
Yeah, nice. It's a pond in a park called Jefferson County Park in Fairfield, Iowa, where I hike most days.
You walk that every day.
Pretty much, yeah. Not
So let's
walking
just
today because
jump into it. After, what is it, 600, 800 interviews?
700 and something.
So 700 interviews, so many hours. What what would you say is your best advice to a seeker who is really trying to understand what we're talking about and the mystical experience or awakening, and they're frustrated? What would your best tools be from all of those interviews if you had to condense them into a half hour here or hour?
Well, I'll just riff on that question a little
Sure.
bit, see what comes out. I would say that the key ingredient is incentive or motivation. And you have to want this in order to have in order to take the steps to pursue it. And wanting it means knowing that it exists or knowing what it is. And I'll elaborate on what I mean by it in a second. So in my first introduction to the whole idea of enlightenment or higher consciousness was when I was about 17 years old, and some friends who had done LSD were about to turn me onto it, and they were reading we were driving down the post road in Westport, Connecticut. I was driving, 3 friends in the car, and one of the guys in the back seat was reading from Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert's book on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And they were using the word enlightenment. And it's like a little light bulb went off in my head. Enlightenment, whoa. And I had a very fuzzy idea of what it was, but it sounded like something I wanted, or that would be interesting to investigate.
Yes.
And then, then we took LSD, and I realized the world is very different from different people's perspectives. It's not all the same world, which I had previously assumed. And, and I just started reading Zen books and this and that while still messing around with drugs for about a year. But, I kind of was hooked on the idea that higher consciousness, whatever we want to call it, is possible. And I couldn't forget that. And finally, I got fed up with drugs and decided to learn meditation. And that was a much more healthy and enjoyable path for me. And I just had this, even though I had been a total flake in many respects, difficult childhood, and dropped out of high school and so on. I guess I had a certain amount of innate intelligence, and I just applied it to this field and began, studying and reading and going to meditation retreats, and eventually becoming a transcendental meditation teacher, and continuing to go on long retreats, and 6 weeks, 6 months, just going at it, and
Right.
eventually getting master's degrees in Vedic science and so on. So it's always been rewarding for me. And I guess that's a key point, which is that if what you're doing is not rewarding, you're not going to have the incentive to keep doing it. So, if you start exploring spirituality and you learn this technique or go to that teacher and so on, and it doesn't seem to float your boat or light your fire, maybe you should shop around a little bit more and find something that would be more suitable. Which is not to say you should be a dilettante, just skipping superficially from one thing to the next. And incidentally, I'm in the car now, for those who are wondering why the change of scene, because our cell reception wasn't good, so I'm going to a better spot. But in any case, yes, I mean, all the fuss that people have made throughout history about spirituality and God and all this stuff, there's a reason for it, which is that there's actually something to it. You can actually radically transform the effort. Okay. It's a little choppy. What's the last thing you heard me say?
I think welcome to Gurus in Cars Getting Coffee. The last thing you said, I think the same idea, but you said it better, that there's a lot of hoopla out there about something spiritual, and you're saying that's because there is something spiritual. There is a greater reality. Whether you like it or not, it's there.
Yeah. And it's not just it's incredibly enjoyable and practical to live it, to experience it. It's not just some kind of weird, mystical, ooga booga thing that monks in a cave might enjoy. It's something that, regardless of your specifics in life, of your role, of whether you're, raising a family or you're an athlete or whatever you're doing, if you add this dimension to your life, you'll be glad you did. And so maybe we can explore why you'd be glad you did, or maybe that's kind of like elementary for your listeners. I don't know.
No, I would love for you to go in. So you're saying there's a ground out there, like there is a ground that you can connect to, and I would love for you to go into it.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm just navigating a roundabout here. Don't want to hit anybody. So, we've all heard these sayings, like the kingdom of heaven is within you, for instance, from Jesus, or, Brahman in Hinduism is described as Sat Chit Ananda,
Yes.
and Anand, existence, consciousness, bliss, and and then they say Tat Twamasi, thou art that, you are Brahman. And so what it's saying is that who you really are, your essential nature, is pure consciousness, which is blissful in its nature, inherently blissful.
Yeah.
So everybody wants happiness, from a little puppy dog to a mosquito to human beings. All life forms are seeking. They have a natural tendency to seek something more,
Right.
and to seek greater happiness, we could say, however they may perceive it. And what I just said suggests is that there's an ultimate sort of source or reservoir of happiness, from which all the happiness we experience is. Rather, let me reframe that sentence. Of which all the happiness we may experience in life, all the pleasures, and so on, are a faint reflection.
Yes.
So what I'm saying there is that the amount of happiness you can derive from a good meal or a relationship or listening to a beautiful symphony, as laudable and as legitimate as those types of happiness may be, they're just kind of a little shard of a much larger ocean of happiness, little drop of a much larger ocean of happiness that exists deep within you, but actually everywhere. It is eventually perceived as existing, because again, all this is that, and we all have the tools, we all have the apparatus to experience that. This is not just a philosophy,
Right.
And although it is a philosophy, but it's a philosophy that can be substantiated with personal experience. And I think the kind of ultimate purpose of life, or the greatest sort of aspiration of life, is, or should be, to have that experience, to realize that. Not realizing it, it's kind of a tragedy. It's
Yes.
As one saint in India said, it takes a long time before you have the opportunity to have a human life, and if you fail to reach enlightenment, you've sold a diamond for the price of spinach. All right, now let me switch to I'm at my destination, so I'm going to switch over to my earbuds and walk to a place where I'm going to sit. So we can keep talking while we do that. Let me just unplug this, plug in this.
Dance company from Chicago.
Okay, it's a bit of a disjointed interview.
There you are.
Yeah, I'm going to a spot where I can actually see the cell tower. All right, let's carry on.
So you're saying there, one thing I like that you always say is there's a background and a foreground to consciousness, and we're used to that foreground of these are my words, but a monkey mind or regular consciousness where it's distracted and distorted, and there's an ego, and you would say, I've heard you say, when you switch that background, all of a sudden becomes the foreground. And
good point.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, it's like, for most people, they don't even know that this thing exists that we're talking about here. This sort of deep reservoir of happiness and intelligence and whatnot, consciousness. They just kind of assume that life as we see it is what's real. And the Zen, the 10 Zen ox herding pictures?
Not sure.
Huh. It's a cool thing. It's a famous depiction of the various stages of development in Zen, where, I guess at first the guy doesn't even know there is an ox, and then he sees some footprints of the ox, and then he catches a glimpse of the ox's tail, and he goes through these different stages, and eventually he comes, back into the town riding the ox and laughing.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So,
what do you think of, this is a little speculation, but what do you think of the people that don't know, which is a big percentage that I wasn't aware of it for so many years as an atheist and a skeptic, a James Randi skeptic, so a real skeptic.
Professional skeptic.
What's that?
Professional skeptic.
Professional card-carrying skeptic.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think it's almost like a school and eventually it just goes around and around until it's presented to them in little breadcrumbs and things, and they reject and over many lifetimes they finally, like Buddha with that beautiful analogy of a bird flying with the silk over that mountain that's like 8 miles high, and the silk just brushes the mountain once every 100 years, and by the time it finally takes the mountain down, that's how long it's taken for us to become enlightened.
I don't know. That's a little bit of a depressing assessment.
I know.
It might be faster than that, but who knows? I mean, if it's true that like, for instance, you read Mayor Baba, and he has this whole thing about the scale of evolution from rocks to, vegetables to insects to, lower animals to higher animals. And he kind of lays it out as this long span of evolutionary stages that the soul has to progress through. And so maybe it's that way. Who am I to say? But
I love what he says about the beloved, that there's at first, I totally agree with this, and I think you do too. There's only love or pure awareness or consciousness or pure imagination, and then it wants love has to love, so it has to have another, so it splits and gets lost, and that's sort of like the garden, and it gets lost and everything, and it searches and suffers, and then it finally and when the suffering reaches its peak, he says, Baba, that that's when the separation is at its strongest, and then boom, it finds the beloved, the lover finds the beloved, and it realizes that every obstacle was put by itself in its own way in order to make it a challenge until it finally finds what it's always been.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I don't think that the problems and obstacles in life are ultimately obstacles. I think everything is divinely orchestrated, and ultimately there's nothing but God, you could say.
Yes.
We can elaborate on what we mean by God, but so the whole universe is one giant evolution machine, and nothing happens capriciously or arbitrarily. And if you could zoom out big enough, wide enough, everything that happens is ultimately in the service of evolution. And that might seem like a very glib and cruel thing to say in light of the tremendous suffering that people go through. And if you're going to accept that notion, you have to kind of accept that life is much more extensive than a single lifetime. That we go through various experiences in order to, evolve as a soul, and not all those experiences are pretty. But this is philosophical banter.
I love that, though. I've always called it I like you call it an evolution machine. I called it like a spiritual machine, and it's so fine tuned. And you've been talking about this in email. I mean, it's so fine-tuned. There's no way you can get away with one thing. There's no cheating and getting away with anything. It's so perfectly tuned. and you
Yeah.
must go home. It's like a homeward bound machine, and you must make
Yeah.
the process home.
What you're alluding to here is you and I and some others are in this little chat group, and there's one guy in the chat group who's still a card carrying atheist. He hasn't relinquished his card,
Yeah.
and or maybe he got your card because he used to not be an atheist. But
He's
in any
getting
case,
stronger and stronger too. He's getting he's unbelievable. He's great.
Yeah. But
We
I
love him.
posted this thing the other day of like 10 points of various laws of nature in the universe, like the gravitational constant and the strength of the gravitational force, and the rate of expansion of the universe in the microseconds after the Big Bang, and so on and so forth. And in every case, each one of these variables, if it were off just a tiny fraction
By a hair.
of what it actually was, like a fraction of a percent of what it actually was, we either wouldn't have a universe, or we would have a universe that was completely unfriendly to the emergence of life, and so on. So it's like if you calculated the statistics of all 10 of these things having to be just as they were, the chances of it happening randomly or accidentally are astronomically small, just infinitesimally small. So many scientists, such as what's his name, Robert Lanza, and others, he's at Harvard, postulate that there is some kind of a biocentrism at work in the universe, some kind of intelligent design, all that phrase is loaded, which has fabricated life, or fabricated the universe in a way that is conducive to the emergence of life and intelligent life. And we can tie it in with spirituality here, which is conducive to the emergence of physical entities or vehicles, which can serve as vehicles for the evolution of the soul. And then some people take objection to that whole notion and postulate that there's a multiverse, and that there are virtually infinite number of universes, and we just happen to have lucked out to be in the one in which all these 10 variables line up perfectly, because otherwise they become too uncomfortable with the notion that there's some kind of intelligence that has brought this about.
I was one of those guys for so many years. And I
what kind of woke you up to the different way of seeing it?
Well, I was with Randy for all those years, and Carl Sagan and Asimov, and it was such a group. And
you were with Sagan and Asimov, or you were reading their stuff?
Well, they would come in and out of the house. At Randy's house was like an open. I was his apprentice.
Oh, cool.
Since when I was 19, I moved in to the house.
Yeah.
And so it was an amazing time, and I was a magician, so I would be. We were setting it up where I would be his opening act, but he took me on for free, and just because he could sense my heart, and people helped him when he was younger, so he helped me. He was a really kind atheist, a wonderful. Most atheists are great, the scientific atheists are so kind, especially in our group. Our guys are great, the few that we talk to and battle every day.
Yeah, no, a lot of them are wonderful. Michael Shermer, he's a famous
He's
atheist.
Good. He's in with Randy.
Yeah, I've listened to a bunch of his stuff, and it's just, you love the guy. He's just, and he's kind of open-minded. For instance, he had this interesting conversation with the guy I interviewed about intelligent design, and he was just so respectful and thoughtful, and during the whole interview, he just hasn't been convinced, and that's cool. There's no reason anybody should take anything on faith.
Right.
I don't believe much in faith. To me, items that you might take on faith are better understood as hypotheses, which you could choose to explore
Yeah.
experientially and empirically, if you wish to do so. So, is there God? Are there angels? Is there life after death? All these things. You don't have to believe in these things. Just kind of proceed on your path of spiritual evolution and see whether you arrive at some kind of experiential substantiation of such
Right.
ideas.
So in my case, I was knocking on tape. I knew the physics that everything was empty, or I would
Mm-hmm.
cling to that 0.0001%, something, but I knew that mostly empty. And then I met another hero of mine, another magician who's the greatest card magician, close-up magician in the world. And he said, I met with him in a lecture, and the way I met him, Rick, like I walked into the magic shop after a year of philosophy and psychology at the university, at Stony Brook University, and I walked in totally on a whim, totally a whim. I didn't look up anything. I just walked in. It's been a year, and they all say, "Hey, we knew you were coming." And that bothered me, and it's like, no, I didn't know I was coming, and they
What?
stayed with it. The whole group there said, "We knew you were coming." No, we really knew. And I said, "But I didn't know this morning. This was total chance." And they said, "Nope." And as I could feel it coming up, the anger. And they turned the flyer around on the counter, and it was this guy, Paul Harris, greatest magician in the sleight of hand guy in the world. He was going to be lecturing there the next day, tomorrow, the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So he was my hero. Like Randy and him were my heroes. And I walked in to the magic shop on a whim the day before the lecture. So I just bought a ticket, walked right out, and the next day came back ready for Paul Harris, and he gave an amazing sleight of hand extravaganza. And during a break in the middle where he sat and sold some of his books, my friends all pushed me up as I was too shy, and they pushed me up to him, and I had my cards, and I was doing like 160 cuts a minute and throwing them and catching them, and he just it was all inspired by him, but he looked and he said, "Who let this guy in here?" As a joke. And
Yeah.
we started to talk, and I said, "You seem from your books, even though there were magic books and high level sleight of hand for magicians only, really, in the books, there were little hints, like little mushrooms with gnomes peeking around on each chapter and little breadcrumbs." So I said, "You seem to be into philosophy or something." And he said, "Very much so, very much so." And he said, "Come to dinner tonight." So the head of the shop, my friend Ron, went to dinner with Paul, and he invited me, and it was just us, and all we did was talk. And he said, "Everything that Randy says is wrong. It's all wrong. Not the work against the psychics or the faith healers, but the material view is wrong. Materialism is wrong. Atheism is wrong." And he just shattered everything. But again, it was just words. And I was talking about more books and reading more. And he said, "No, the beautiful thing is less." He had a vision of two bookends shutting like this, pushing his whole library into one book. And I reached for the book, and he just clapped my hand and said, "No, this is about non-conceptual space." And so that started me. And then I meditated, and on maybe 3 or 4 tries, there was a breakthrough.
Nice.
And it felt like I was dying, and there was no medicine. It was a little puff of pot. That was it. But I wasn't a pot guy. I was a drinker, and that little puff just, and I knew about Neti Neti because I had watched Stephen Walensky. Do you know him, Stephen Walensky?
Yeah.
And I knew, but I, as an atheist, I still could sense that he was right about something, but I couldn't see it yet. And so I knew Neti Neti, not this, and I kept doing that and broke through to this. I thought I died, and it was just endless love and no body and no me and no. It was beautiful. And then I wrote Paul and wrote my friends, and Paul wrote back, "Welcome home," and that was the start. And I
Nice.
thought that was the end, but that was just the start of it. Because
Yeah.
it didn't stick. It didn't stay.
Yeah. Before I respond to that, what do you think about that guy Shin Lim, who I think his name is, who won
Paul is
the America's Got
responsible.
Talent?
Paul is responsible for him being out there.
Okay, cool.
So
You like
yeah,
it? I mean,
pushed him.
is he good? He seems pretty impressive.
He's one of the best. Yeah, he's the
Yeah.
real deal. Really
Yeah.
good. And later, if you want, we have to mention Uri Geller. We have to go into
Yeah.
that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, this thing about, okay, so you had this breakthrough, but it didn't stay. All right. So that's a common phenomenon. And I think a lot of times people are almost given a glimpse, you know, so that they'll realize there's something
Yes.
worth pursuing. And then it's taken away again, if we want to look at it that way. And, but you know, there's something there, darn it. And you can't.
And I
like,
couldn't shut up about it. And I would go to my
Yeah.
best friends and say, it is a dream. It really is. It's just like a dream.
Yeah. And so, you know, you get this taste and then you have to pursue it. You know, you have to kind of, it won't let you sleep. It won't, well, you can sleep, but it won't sort of let you just
Right.
rest until you find what it is you've had the taste of. And I think there's a lot of interesting, you know, stories like The Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and all, where that kind of theme has been woven in, you know, the
Yeah.
Seeker's Quest or whatever it's called. And this
The hero's journey.
hero's journey, right? And typical obstacles that you meet along the way and so on. But you know, I want to get back to one thing quickly, which is, you know, we're talking about this sort of intrinsic fulfillment that can be derived from spiritual awakening. But I just want to reemphasize the practicality of it, because I know in my case, it just had, and in the cases of many people I know, it just had such practical, real world benefits.
Yes.
In terms of like beginning to live a more successful life. You know, I got back, in my case, I got back into school. I got in a band that was, you know, quite successful, and, you know, had relationships much more successfully than I had before. And, you know, one thing after the other. And you know, I guess one way of looking at that is the old saying that we only use a small fraction of our full mental potential, you know, and if that's true, and if spiritual development unfolds more of our mental potential, then naturally you're going to be more successful in whatever you're doing, you know,
Yes.
whether it's studying or being a business person or an athlete or whatever. So, you know, this spiritual stuff isn't just about kind of some inner experience that you can marinate in. It also, you know, you could say that it brings about the unfoldment of 200% of life, 100% inner values, 100% outer values, and, well, at least moving in that direction.
Yeah, and you see that with even like Jerry Seinfeld, you know, when he started to meditate, he said he would have never made it through. He had to skip his lunch break to do transcendental meditation, and that's what allowed Seinfeld to happen. So for guys like that, it's almost like putting the phone on the charger and recharging and giving them that boost, and more. And David Lynch, you know, there's so many.
Seinfeld had an interesting story about Tom Hanks. So Tom Hanks came to him, maybe, I don't know, it might have been 5 years ago, and said he was going to take a sabbatical because he was burned out. You know, he just couldn't do any more movies. He was exhausted. And Jerry said, well, you know, why don't you meditate? And you know, that's what I've been doing for decades. And so Tom Hanks, a friend of mine, went and taught Tom Hanks, and Hanks said that he expected some guy to show up in a man bun, you know, but this guy showed up looking very sort of straight and ordinary. But anyway, he didn't have to take that sabbatical. He's made many movies since then, because it just recharges your batteries, you know, to meditate deeply on a regular basis.
And it fits what you posted this morning. I think it was this morning or yesterday about, this is a little bit of a switch, but I think it's the same idea, that with the salt and the ocean or the lake, the more expansive you are, the easier, not the easier, but the gentler maybe suffering would be.
Yeah. Let me
Can you
just
talk
explain
about
what you're
that? Sure.
alluding to. Yeah, it was sort of a Hindu fable where the student comes to the master and he's complaining about everything, and the master says, "All right, take this little. Here's a teaspoon of salt. Put it in this glass of water." So he puts it and stirs it, and he said, "Take a drink." And how does it taste? Ew, it's really salty. I don't like it. He said, "All right, let's go to the lake." So they go to the lake, and he gives them a teaspoon of salt and says, "Throw that in the lake." And then after a little bit, "All right, take a glass of water out of the lake and drink that. How is it?" "It's fine. It's good. It tastes like good water." He said, "All right, you need to be a lake, not just a glass." And so the metaphor is that if your consciousness can be vast and expansive and deep, then the ordinary vicissitudes of life, you're still going to experience them, but you have the capacity to experience them with much greater equanimity. Your world isn't rocked by small losses and gains. Maybe another analogy would be if a person is, let's say they have $10 to their name and they gain or lose $5, it's a big deal,
Yeah.
But if they're a multimillionaire, they could gain or lose. I mean, Elon Musk, sometimes gains or loses billions in a day,
Yes.
according to what the stock market is doing. But it's no big deal, because he has the sort of the buffer of all that wealth. And of course, here we're talking about spiritual wealth or consciousness wealth, which gives you a buffer that makes it much easier to deal with the ups and downs of life.
And you can see this, like you said this before, that these aren't just I don't know what you called it, mumbo jumbo. Is some spiritual, like it's not just this guy in a bun or in a turban. You can experience it in your regular everyday life. And I'll give a little example. I'm in Guatemala now, in this beautiful little town, San Marcos, and I came from New York to here. I never left the States, anything, but flew to here. And there's little tuk-tuks that fly around, and they're loud and they zip around. There are no cars, and it's very beautiful. And I never noticed them. But when my cat got sick, 6 months into the whole thing, my cat was sick. And I was at the pharmacy, which I've stood at many times, and in that area, and the tuk-tuks go by there. When my cat was sick, I could feel the tuk-tuks. And I noticed that, they annoyed me, and I turned around. I almost said something like, easy, like, slow down. But for months and for months after, now, I love the tuk. I love all of it. I don't even notice it. But
Yeah.
when I was squeezed, because it was life or death for the cat and the medicine, and they didn't have it. Now what do I do? In New York, I could have gotten that medicine like this, but here, who knows, a boat ride, maybe a guy will get it. I'm in the jungle and I could feel it. So I didn't have I had more spaciousness than maybe an average person, but not my usual. I noticed the level drop.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and there's actually, scientific studies on this sort of thing in terms of, the ability to not overreact to stressful stimuli and recuperate more quickly from stressful stimuli and things like that. The whole, which is an interesting point that we haven't really mentioned, which is that spiritual development is not just a consciousness thing or a mind thing or a subjective thing. It's a neurophysiological thing. And they've done a lot of studies on TM meditators, on Buddhist meditators, and so on. And the neurophysiology, there changes in so many different ways that are measurable. And even the way the brain grows, which you've heard the term neuroplasticity, the brain does continue to change throughout life. And people who've been meditating a long time have a thicker prefrontal cortex, which is supposed to be a good thing, and various other things that I'm not qualified to speak on. But the body is indeed the temple of the soul, or so. It's like the instrument through which anything is experienced, and in particular enlightenment is experienced. And so having a radically different state of consciousness or subjective experience or perspective on life would imply that your neurophysiology has been radically transformed as well.
Right. And I remember as a skeptic, and I was a big psych. I have a degree in experimental psychology and studied like crazy. I could never knock meditation. Never. The results were always good. Oh, it was never anything negative. It was always positive and always, you can't really knock it, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, to play devil's advocate on that, there's a
Okay.
lady named Willoughby Britton up at Brown University in Rhode Island, who has a place called Cheetah House, Cheetah like the big cat, and she has specialized in dealing with meditation casualties. You know,
Oh,
people who've had bad experiences. Now, usually it has to do with, you know, someone who is really kind of mentally unstable to begin with, perhaps, and you know, meditation tips them over the edge. Maybe they would have gone over the edge anyway, but also, you know, there are instances where, you know, some people either shouldn't meditate very much, or certainly shouldn't do long meditation retreats where they're doing 10 hours a day right off the bat.
right,
And there have been many articles and studies on how that has proven to be unwise. You know,
right.
you really have to, safety first. You really have to sort of take it in doses that you can handle,
Yes.
because you can actually destabilize yourself. And I've been through some phases myself where I was
Right.
rather unstable.
I know a maintenance guy that I work with who was very Catholic, very Jehovah Witness. And
Mm-hmm.
when I mentioned, I would always give him a little bow or have a Buddha or something. And he said, no meditation. I said, why? And he said, the demons come in, like you know. So
Yeah.
that woke me up a little to that. And I think there was one more person that, like, the same with psychedelics. The circus starts when they're quiet. You know, the circus comes to
Yeah.
town and I
Right.
can understand that.
Well, that's true. That's a good corollary there, because there's been some great research on psychedelics these days at Johns Hopkins and New
Yes.
York University and elsewhere. And, you know, there are certain people who shouldn't take them under any circumstances, you know,
Yes.
and then there are other people who might even be really stressed out, like PTSD sufferers, who have benefited greatly from taking them.
Yes.
So, you know, meditation, like psychedelics, can be a powerful thing. And like anything in life, I mean, you can kill yourself taking too many aspirin, you know,
Right,
or
right.
too many Tylenol or whatever. So like anything, you have to do it in sensible proportions and you know, in a responsible way.
Randy on stage he was very against homeopathy.
Mm-hmm.
So he would take the sleeping pills on stage, the real
homeopathic sleeping pills.
and he would take them the whole lecture. I mean, really, at the end, he had like 200 of them, and
and nothing happened, right?
Nothing happened. Yeah. And then he had that great line. I don't know if it's his, but he did that joke about did you hear about the homeopath who overdosed? He forgot to take his medicine.
That's pretty
good. It's a great line.
Yeah. I like that.
So Randy was, the way I found Randy was this beautiful book called The Magic of Uri Geller. And I was maybe 12 years old when I read it. Nice book on this spoon bender from Israel who came to the States, and he was able to look at spoons and rub them, and the spoon would bend, the knife would bend, the fork would bend. When he went to England, he stopped Big Ben. They said he could stop watches, and with his mind, if you made a drawing, you hold the drawing and he can just discern what it was without looking at it. And Randy was his biggest nemesis, and Randy would duplicate. The first thing he would duplicate, I'm sure you've seen him do it. Uri Geller would go on a talk show and bend the spoons with his mind and make a compass stop and turn, and then Randy would come on the next week and do everything just as good, sometimes even better, with a little more flair and funny, and make the compass move faster and without touching it. And he would never really say how it was done, but by duplicating it, he was trying to say, use Occam's razor. What would be the best explanation, the simplest? It's probably that Uri Geller is using magic, and he was a very skilled magician because he was able to fool scientists at Stanford. And so I just wanted to bring up with you, I know so many of these people that are talking about the mystical experience or awakening, they'll also include spoon bending and Uri Geller and these weird pseudoscience things in their books. And to me, it was always like what Douglas Hofstadter said about Ray Kurzweil. He said Kurzweil has these great ideas, but it's like sometimes there's a little bit of bullshit in there, and it takes away from the idea. It's like making a beautiful gourmet meal and putting a little bit of dog shit into a dog excrement and that ruins the whole meal. Just that little sprinkle of it ruins the whole meal. So I think we should maybe talk about that and stop people from, because as a skeptic, it would turn me off immediately to read a book about awakening, but then Uri Geller or spoon bending or moving objects with your mind is in the book. That would bother me.
Yeah. So what do you think? Was Uri just a good magician?
A really skilled magician, really skilled. And he totally admitted it now. I think he'll say 95% was tricks and once in a while it happened. Do you remember when he was on the Tonight Show, Johnny Carson, who's a magician who had Randy on about 30 times. Johnny was a magician before he became a talk show host. He called Randy, and Randy couldn't be there. So he said, what can I do to make sure Uri doesn't cheat if he cheats? And Randy said 3 things. Number 1, don't let him see any of the spoons or clocks or things. Don't let him see anything until showtime. Don't let him touch anything backstage. Lock it up. Number 2, watch him like a hawk during commercials, because when Doc Severson and the band, Uri Geller will bang his foot and shake things on the table, and he'll be able to discern certain, like if you have 10 film canisters and only one of them has gold in it and the rest are empty, he'll bang his foot and look what shakes and what doesn't, very tricky. And the 3rd thing was, don't let his best friend Shippy Strang, who would give him like signs from the audience, don't let him in the audience at all. Don't let him. So they locked him. They locked Shippy out. They didn't let Uri see any of the stuff. It came out on a tray, the spoons and the forks and the nails, and they watched him during the commercials. Johnny was like this, like just staring at him from the desk. Uri even said, why are you so focused on me? And nothing happened on the Tonight Show, not a 0.
Right. Yeah.
And he just said, I didn't feel strong that night.
Right. So, I mean, in the world of spirituality, of course, we have autobiography of a yogi, and we have, Sai Baba, and we have even Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras outlining all these siddhis that yogis are supposed to be able to perform. And the general sentiment, among most spiritual teachers is that this is a sideshow, don't get caught up in it. But some people have tried to use it as a PR stunt. I think that's what Sai Baba was doing. Our friend in our chat group very clearly explained to me one time that how what a lousy sleight of hand artist he was in terms of producing this vibhuti powder and stuff, and anybody. So I don't know. It's like, personally, I believe that this kind of thing might be possible, that people have levitated or walked on water or whatever. But would I stake my life on it? No, I wouldn't need to. I mean, I don't think I'm going to not go to heaven if I don't believe it or some such thing. And if I'll believe it if I say it, all the more. I'll be a lot more certain of it. And I think it's more interesting, perhaps, to consider if such things are possible. how would they work? If you can walk on water or levitate, what is it about human consciousness that could enable you to do that? And my explanation, which I'm sure is in need of great improvement, is that most fundamentally, human consciousness is the foundation of the universe itself. It's the field of totality in which all the laws of nature reside. And perhaps if you're firmly enough established in that, then you can have some mastery over laws of nature. I mean, what the disciples said when Jesus stilled the storm, they said, oh, look, even the wind and seas obey him. So perhaps, if like right now I can move my arm because I perceive my arm as being part of me. And perhaps if I were one with everything perceptually and actually operating from the level of intelligence from which everything arises and in which everything is contained, perhaps I could have mastery over the laws of nature that govern the universe and use them in such a way as to levitate my body or something. That's my understanding of how that might work.
But for me, it
but
just
I think
seems like
there's been a lot of chicanery in that whole field. Yeah.
And it just seemed like when D.T. Suzuki says, what's the difference between enlightenment and regular life? And he said it's like being an inch off the ground. Like for me, when you're in this spaciousness, it's already enough. You don't need You don't need to, like when Thich Nhat Hanh says the miracle is walking on the earth and actually stepping on the ground or leaning on a tree. That's a miracle. You pulling on the ear is a miracle.
Oh, my ear itched. There's a bug biting.
That's a miracle.
And having compassion and, not mistreating people. I mean, those things, I value those things a lot more. I mean, Sai Baba was sexually molesting young boys while manifesting vibhuti. And, so I would be much more impressed if he were just a really ethical person, which is the whole area we can get into is ethics and spirituality.
I'm ready.
And didn't perform any little magic tricks. I would have been much more inclined to go see him or something.
Not a lot of people. Some people are upset. Some people are upset with you when you take down a Muji or you take down, not a lot of people, some people that. And I think it's a beautiful move, what you're doing. You have a no tolerance policy, when these things happen, like, and he's a friend of mine, David Hopmeister, and these things come out. And I think you said he was your second highest interview on the site.
Yeah. Yeah, it turned out he was like ripping people off financially big time. Taking people's life savings and inheritances and things like that. And then, when they finally woke up from the delusion of that caused them to give those things to him, not giving them back to them.
Right.
And then I had a couple of friends who went down to his retreat center in Mexico and had a horrible time. Barely got out of there with their lives because they had one person had a medical emergency and it was just disregarded and they were not given proper attention or care. And, so, I mean, I just feel I have a responsibility or a moral obligation in who I promote. Batgap is a means of promotion. And some of these people are a lot more famous than Batgap. And so who's promoting whom? But nonetheless, I kind of feel like there should be a good housekeeping seal of approval sort of thing on spiritual teachers. And if it endangers people to go to them, but that's not generally known, but it's something I know because of reports I've received from people, then I'm willing to take some flack for taking down their interview. And even if I can't really explain publicly what the feedback I've received is, which is very often the case. People say, oh, don't breathe the word of this to anybody because they'll know who told you, and then I'll have people coming after me and stuff like that. Yeah. There's a lot of that too. There's a lot of retribution in spiritual groups if somebody dares to criticize the teacher or
it's like junior high school stuff.
Yeah, we have this organization that I helped to start called the Association for Spiritual Integrity, and we had a webinar a week or two ago on cancel culture, and I guess I'm guilty of it in a way. I cancel people, but not capriciously. If I've discovered that someone I've interviewed has raped women or is taking people's money and not returning it, and or anything like that, but sex is the biggest offense and money is usually second, then I have an obligation to take them down there. And they may
but
still
you don't crucify them. You just drop the interview and that's it.
quietly.
Like you don't go out, and there's plenty of room for redemption for them or whatever, but that you just take the interview down. That's all.
Yeah. And there was one guy, I won't name him, who I took his interview down because I received some, rather disturbing complaints about his behavior. And
I know.
But then quite a few years went by, and there were no further complaints, and he seemed to be doing good work, and so on and so forth. So I just quietly put it back up again, and because people can change, although very often they don't. But
yeah.
and I don't. It makes me feel a little weird talking like this because I don't claim to be morally perfect myself, and I'm not some kind of judge of character or someone who can pass judgment on people. And I don't like to do that, but I just have a responsibility, and I exercise it to the best of my ability, and maybe I'm wrong sometimes, and if I am, I'm eager to hear why. I mean, there's another guy who I took his interview down after getting some rather serious complaints, and then he engaged me in a big conversation about how I was hurting his career and stuff, and then I was hearing some good things about him, and then I checked with some of the people who originally complained about him, and it's like, is he cool now? And then they sent me a whole bunch of screenshots of just really yucky stuff that was still going on. And
so what's going on there? That it's like the message sometimes is like the Course in Miracles is a beautiful book, to use Hofmeister or sure, whoever these people are, Bentino Massaro, I don't know how to say his name, or whoever. They're saying like his interview could be fine. It's just then the person sort of doesn't represent the interview in their regular life, and that takes away from the so you're not against the message, it's just the person.
Well, the saying, walking your talk. I mean, it's easy to use these words, read a bunch of books, and you get the lingo in your head, and it's easy to talk about this stuff. But I think the rubber needs to meet the road, to use another metaphor. You need to be able to live up to the what you're espousing. And if you're saying all this lovely stuff, but then you're sexually abusing your students or whatever, you are a work in progress, and you probably should progress a heck of a lot more before you serve as a teacher, because you're not really serving if you are. I mean, it's a serious matter to I mean, here's an example of someone who is deceased that we can talk about. Robert Adams, Silence of the Heart, total fraud. I have
I have to say I loved his books.
Wrote a beautiful book.
I understand the person himself.
His name wasn't Robert Adams, actually, and he never went to India. He never met Ramana Maharshi or Nisargadatta or any of these people. He was a bullshitter, and he had a tendency to hit on the young women who would come to him, and which resulted in some severe disillusionment. I believe one woman eventually committed suicide. And this kind of thing can throw people off the spiritual path. They come to a spiritual teacher with all kinds of naivete and inspiration and earnestness, and then they get abused in some way, and it can be quite shattering. So I think it's a great responsibility to be a spiritual teacher, because you really do have the most precious aspect of their lives. You are sort of engaging with, their spiritual aspiration. And, if you know what you're doing, you can be very uplifting and facilitate their growth. But if you are really not qualified, you can throw them off the track of their evolution for quite some time. And if you believe in karma, there may very well be some karmic blowback for having done that.
I agree. I think you're doing great work with that. So here's a fun question for you. I know you'll like this. My whole, since 2009, but mainly maybe 2015 till now, I would talk with, we both know RJ, we could say RJ, and my friend, he's in Richard, who's in our email group, Schopenhauer, Bernardo fan, RJ. So RJ and I would debate what is the better path, the Bodhisattva path or the Arhat path? And do you have any I know you have an answer to that.
So the Bodhisattva path is right. You keep coming back to serve humanity for as long as you can, or as long as it needs serving, and so on. And the Arhat path is you're up and out, right?
Yes.
Right.
And you know that all is well, and you're on the mountaintop or in the cave, and all is well. You know it. You see the whole thing. It just seems like, I give my answer, it seems like the Bodhisattva path is I don't want to say better. The Bodhisattva path is I'll just say better, is the better or the deeper path because if you really know it and you're on the mountaintop and you know the whole thing, you got it. It's all one. You have it. You can trudge down that mountain. You wouldn't trudge. You'd skip down the mountain and enter and face people because you know they're suffering, and you can face it, and you would help them and try to guide them. It seems like the Arhat avoids that a little bit, but I don't know.
Well, several things to say about that. Firstly, I've been through both. I went through many years where my feeling goes, oh, life sucks. I want to just get enlightened and never get reincarnated again. Right. And these days, my attitude is, hey, I'll do whatever whatever God wants, however I can best be of service. Either here or there or whatever. Right. I don't care. I'm having fun, and I'm not in any big hurry to obliterate my existence. And I don't necessarily think that enlightenment does obliterate your existence, but although maybe there's that option. And I'm reminded of a couple of things that Sri Ramakrishna said. This is somewhat related, but he said, would you rather be sugar or taste sugar? Yes. Would you rather merge with God and be God, or would you rather sort of maintain some separation and taste, have the devotional I-thou relationship with God? And then when Swami Vivekananda first had his awakening, he said to Ramakrishna, oh, this is so wonderful. Now let me just go to the Himalayas and live out my existence in a cave or something. And Ramakrishna said, what is wrong with you? I'm so disappointed. I had such high hopes for you. I expected you that you're going to go out and serve the world.
Yes. And Yogananda too, right? Yogananda was going to stay in a cave, and he said, I'll go to the US.
Right. So I think, but ultimately, the thing about being sugar or tasting sugar is a matter of personal proclivities, and maybe the Arhat versus Bodhisattva thing is too. And who am I to say what a person should do? So I think one is naturally should follow their own inclinations, and maybe some people are destined dharmically to be an Arhat and just check out. Maybe they'll serve on some other loka, in some other kind of body, and others are wired to keep serving here. Right. A friend of mine once died. She died, and we were around Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and he said she must have been needed elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I said this on the last podcast, but I'll say it again fast. I'm sure you know it. Two people walking through the desert, and they're ready to drop. They're thirsty. They're hungry, they're going to die, they're not going to make it, and it's so bad, and they hear running water, and they look up, and there's a wall, and mango trees are coming over the wall, and it's paradise. It's food and water, and everything is there. And one of them climbs right over and replenishes and eats of the fruit and sits there. But the other one turns around and goes right back into the desert to guide people who can't find their way to there. And it seems like those two are the one. You need sometimes to you need to be the Arhat, and then you be a Bodhisattva. You know, it's both.
Now, the guy who went back into the desert, maybe he should have eaten some mangoes and gotten a big drink before going back into the desert, so he would survive and reach the
Let
people.
him throw him a few apples.
Yeah. Right.
Right. It doesn't have to be so dry. So what are your, if we have tools to go up this Mount Everest of consciousness, what are your favorite metaphors that you'd put in your toolbox? The ocean and the wave, or what would you use to help a seeker that's ready to throw a noose over a rafter and they just can't do it anymore? They're trying to figure this out.
Huh.
They're fighting.
I actually there's a woman I interviewed who actually was planning to throw a noose over a rafter. Literally, her name is Robin Chaurasia, and she had been working in the red light district of Mumbai, not as a prostitute, but as someone who was helping the daughters of prostitutes get out of the red light district and get an education and, you know, live a better life. And she just got totally burned out. So she went up to the mountains, and she was in this stone hut at like 13,000 feet, summer and winter, for a couple of years, and listening to Batgap. She would get down to the town and load up her phone with Batgap interviews, and then go back up to the hut.
That's great.
And but at some point in the whole thing, she kind of like reached the end of her rope, figuratively speaking, and she was thinking of committing suicide, and nobody ever came to her little hut. It had no running water, no electricity. Nobody ever came there, and but she, you know, she had a length of rope, and she thought, okay, in the morning I'm going to hang myself. That morning at about 4 a.m, there was a knock on the door, and it was some hikers. And they said, listen, our backpack broke, and do you happen to have any rope that we could tie it up with?
Come on, you can't write it better than that.
I know. So that was a sign. So in any case, to answer your original question,
metaphor.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there are as many paths as there are people in this world, and one size does not fit all. It's not that everybody should practice this, that, or the other thing, and you'll just follow you. But, you know, the key ingredient, the universal, the common denominator, is the incentive, and that's how we started out this conversation. If you have the incentive, you know there's something higher, and you would like to reach it, then just culture that incentive. Don't allow it to fizzle out. Nourish it, and do things that will nourish it. Practical things, you know, some meditation practice, some YouTube video, some teacher, some book, anything which kind of inspires you, and just kind of follow your impulses, follow your inclinations. And as Jesus said, seek and ye shall find, knock and the door shall be opened. As some Indian gurus say, take one step toward me and I'll take 1,000 steps toward you. And I've seen time and again how when a person just, and sometimes it's actual prayer, you know, person just, they say a prayer, you know, help me out here. What is life all about? What can, you know, get me out of this mess? And then something will come, you know, I mean, Pamela Wilson, whom I've interviewed a couple of times, she was like a young teenager, and she had this teenage angst, like, what is life all about? And she was sitting on her bed one night, and she said, just, you know, I want truth to just come through that door. And, you know, I need to understand what life is all about. And she woke up in the middle of the night, and this little Indian man was sitting on her bed, and she threw a pillow at him, and he disappeared. And then later on, she was in a bookstore, and she saw a book of Ramana Maharshi, and she said, "That was the guy. That was the guy I saw." And then one thing led to the next, you know. And but I think that you can integrate a spiritual pursuit into any lifestyle. Doesn't matter how busy you are. If you're too busy to meditate, you're too busy. If you can't afford, if you can't afford 20 minutes here and maybe once or twice a day, then really, do you ever watch television? All right, watch 20 minutes less television.
I agree.
Do you sit around playing video games or solitaire on your computer? 20 minutes less of that. You can integrate it. And
so it's how much you're saying the desire for God, and we'll define God. How would you define God? You wanted to define it before.
How would I define it? Oh, I just feel that, here I am sitting in a beautiful place. There's another pond over there and beautiful trees and a wetlands meadow and so on and so forth. And if I were to analyze a leaf on this tree that's next to me under a microscope, I would see that in a single cell of that leaf, there's more complexity than the entire city of Tokyo. It's just like this incredible mechanism that is in no way just a random, mechanistic phenomenon. I just think everything is brimming with intelligence, is infused with intelligence. And if we look closely enough, we see it. You could go way out to some place in intergalactic space and analyze a cubic centimeter of intergalactic space, and you would see laws of nature functioning there, gamma rays or whatever whizzing through, and that indicate, orderliness and intelligence governing the universe. So I think really there's nothing but God. And if there is anything other than God, then God has holes in him. Anything you analyze, intelligence is there, even a dung heap or something like that. So that's my definition of God: all-pervading intelligence, and you are that essentially. Who was it? Meister Eckhart or somebody said,
love him.
That which you're seeking is that which is seeking, or some such thing.
Eckhart said, the eye that I look at God is the same eye that God looks at me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing.
There you go. That's the quote.
I think yours is Francis of Assisi, maybe, that in the seeking is in the looking. It is the looking that something like that. And it is in the looking. I think that's what you were saying.
Could be.
I think so.
Get my quotes mixed up. But so that was your question about God. But anyway, about the whole spiritual thing. You've heard the analogy of how can a fish be thirsty in water?
Yes.
Fish lives in water. How can it be thirsty? But we're all kind of thirsty. We feel unfulfilled, and how can that be? It's when it's all just totality of fulfillment. Infinite bliss. Sat Chit Ananda is rock solid totality of the universe, and so it's a strange paradox, but the fact that reality is all pervading means that it's the closest thing to your heart. I heard a quote one time that God may be omnipotent, but the one thing he can't do is remove himself from your heart.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, we are just immersed in that reality, and there's some kind of blinders on that prevents us from realizing that immersion, but those blinders can be removed, and it's not going to happen overnight. But if you just start and just take a step at a time, and one thing leads to the next, all the opportunities that you'll need to realize this present themselves when they're meant to.
That's beautifully said, Rick. Thank you for coming on. Thank you. I know you're a busy guy.
I got to go to Walmart to pick up some groceries.
You got to eat.
You got to eat.
Thank you. Yeah, you got to go over that wall and get some groceries and come back to back out.
Plus my phone is saying low battery, so good timing.
Put it on the cradle.
Right, well, thanks, James. Great talking to you. And thank you very much.
I'll see you.
We'll be in touch.
I'll see you in our
email
fight.
Crazy little chat group. Yeah.
Take care, Rick.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.